did you see an increase in eating disorders with the internet, or was it specifically social media?
It's a good question. I think there are grades up. So pre-internet. So if you think of internet, I think of internet starting around, well, pre-Google. Google kicked in around what, in the 90s, right? So with the internet became more access to imagery and
Mm,
Photoshop, right? So before that, there was only print media, so there were magazines. So I'm fully recovered clinician myself, and when I had an eating disorder back in the day, it was just as the internet was starting up, but mostly imagery was confined to fashion magazines, or movies, and watching and comparing yourself to celebrities or whatever. So then we saw the internet, so we saw more imagery readily available. So I would say that body image angst would have increased again at that point. And then with social media, it's gone through the roof.
ah, I
Yeah.
can see that because all these people are comparing. Do you know
Yeah.
how? Do you have a sense of how rapidly it's increased, like a percentage, like it's increased 500% each year, or anything like that?
There are really good stats on this on the NEDA website. They have some really great stats where they go study by study by study. I can't cite an exact percentage just off the top of my head as I'm thinking about it. But one thing I'd like to add to that conversation, that timeline, Jared, is something else that was really, really important that was a driver in all of this is not just the prevalence or the access to imagery for comparison. And I'm talking probably predominantly talking about females historically, and now unfortunately we're seeing a lot more guys who are falling into this as well. But at a conference I went to a couple of years ago, they did a timeline of BMI of models. And what they found is that, 20, 30 years ago, the average model was a lot more curvaceous. And then as over the decades, the models became thinner and thinner, so much, like Kate Moss, etc., so much so. So she's a model of my generation, of my, when that would have been an influence for me. But the point of that being is that we got to a point with models where models were getting so skinny on the BMI range that Italy had to impose, a minimum, a minimum of 18.5 on a BMI because models were dropping dead. So what's important when you look at the research around this is not just exposure to social media, but it's the thin ideal becoming thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner over the decades that has caused this, or caused, I would say that there's some good stats that suggest this, that when you're comparing, you're seeing a thinner and thinner and thinner ideal, and it just gets crazy.
Yeah, interesting. I wonder what's more responsible for the rise of eating disorders, the social media or the body image?
I think they're so interlinked. So we
Yeah,
know
sure.
that we know that the majority of eating disorders, there's a genetic predisposition. And so, therefore, that hasn't gone away. But with any genetic predisposition, you also need an environmental trigger to basically turn it on, right? And so, if you think about these layers together, where we've got a thinner and thinner ideal, more and more access to comparisons, more and more diets that are readily available because you can just Google anything now. Um, and put all that together
Like a
with
perfect storm.
higher anxiety, because we know that social media actually increases anxiety and depression. So there's a mood piece that goes with eating disorders as well. You've got kind of a perfect storm there.
I'm just feeling so much obsession. Like hearing you speak right now, just obsessing about the body image. You're anxious already from you know, less social connection in general, and more stress these days, and then all that anxiety being channeled into obsession.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's an oversimplification, but I tend to think of eating disorders as a manifestation of just overwhelming anxiety. you know And in a similar way, again, this is an oversimplification, but just to kind of get a handle on it, alcohol use as well. You know, obviously trauma, anxiety, those kind of elements where you have a lot of discomfort within yourself. And so you're trying to figure out a better way of just feeling better. And so channeling your anxiety into something that you feel you can control, how many calories you eat or how much you exercise or how much you weigh, although that's not necessarily controllable, but we think we can control it, helps to channel that anxiety. In the same way that alcohol or drugs for a moment gives people a respite from the discomfort they're feeling in their body or their mind.